Hello, Jeff Zwerink here. Welcome to our current RTBLive. I'm excited to be be with you here today. I've got a good friend George Haraxon, a colleague of mine here at Reasons to Believe.
Good to be here.
Just enjoying the summer weather here. I got to say, I've started working on some projects that my kids are starting to move out. So I need a place in my house where, as they start to get older, get married, a place where they can come and stay. So I've been working on some, trying to get a shed built out in the patio so that I can clean out my garage a little bit and do some stuff like that. So what have you been up to at the start of the summer here?
Wow. We're just about to tear out our patio. It's cold, so doing some home projects, but everyone's been working so much. And we all have this one space that we're working in. And so we're learning to adjust to our work schedules, but having fun together. It's fun to listen to what everyone does in more detail in their lives. And I have adult kids, and I get to hear one works for JPL in cybersecurity, the other one in IT, and I get to hear all their talking. My wife works in the finance industry. So I'm learning all this stuff while also helping out at RTB.
Yeah. No, it really is kind of interesting because I mean, most of the time I go to work, and when I'm at work, I don't really, it's like I'm at work, not at home. And when I'm at home, I'm not at work. And so hearing, the fights that go on and the games that they play and the fun stuff they do, it is a very different dynamic, I'd say, than most of it. So, well, I'm excited to be a part of our show today because what we're going to do is talk about artificial intelligence. As I've thought about artificial intelligence, that's one of those things that is just ubiquitous throughout culture. I mean, I started thinking about it. I just started listing off all the movies I know. Short Circuit, Centennial Man, or maybe it's Bicentennial Man, but HAL, AI. There's just a whole slew of AI type movies. And so I'm excited to have our conversation today. I thought it'd be good to just give you a little bit of introduction, let you kind of share a little bit about what you do and why you're part of our discussion today.
Yeah, no, I feel very honored to be a guest here with Jeff. I fulfill here at RTB. I am the Scholar and Apologetics Community Manager, and I'm coming up here on just about my 1-year anniversary being on staff, even though I've been friends with the ministry upwards of 30 years. And it was funny. I walked into my office, and I have a perpetual calendar that you change manually, and the date says March 5th, and that was the last time I was in my office.
Nice.
So, but I'm coming up here on my 1-year anniversary in July, so it's fun to be on the inside. I've been love the ministry for a very long time. I am also a senior adjunct professor in philosophy and ethics at Azusa Pacific University, which is a local university here in Southern California. And I've taught there.
One of the larger Christian universities in the country, though.
You teach there.
I've taught a class there last semester. Will be this coming fall as well.
So. Yeah, I just taught a class in your department, actually. So, I've been teaching there since 2002, and then at a smaller seminary up in Northern California called Tozer Seminary, which is affiliated with Simpson University. And so I've been doing that for 10 years.
Does that have any connection with A.W. Tozer? I mean, it almost has to, doesn't it?
Well, I mean, it has his name, obviously, and there's a deep love of Tozer there, and the concept of pursuing God will then result in flourishing in your life. The worship of God pursued. And I think they even got, one of our scholar community members used to be the dean there, and she got his, I think, communion table and pulpit that he preached on. Found it and brought it to the school. So anyway.
No, he's hands down one of my favorite authors, and one of the more influential books outside of the Bible that I've read was Knowledge of the Holy. In fact, just reading through it again, I find it's a relatively simple book to read, but one that's very challenging at the same time. I mean, I've not exhausted what there is to get out of that book.
Yeah, he didn't go on for terminal degrees or things like that, but he had an incredible mind. Yes. So not an AI mind. We'll talk about that later. I guess people should also know that I was a pastor for a little over 20 years, a lead pastor and associate pastor at a local church here in Southern California as well. And so I've kind of lived in the academy and in pastoral work, parachurch ministry like this. So those are a lot of fun things to integrate.
Right. Well, again, I'm excited to have you as part of our discussion today. Would encourage you to go check down in the box below and click on the link. There's a way to get some new resources. connects with us and be able to engage with Reasons to Believe More. So I encourage you to do that. And one of the reasons why I am excited about this particular area is, one, is I like computer programming. When I was in graduate school, I'd taken a couple of computer classes, but largely learned how to program C on my own, because that was everything we did computer-wise was written in that language. And so I went from kind of a self-taught C to where I'm relatively proficient at it. But just the idea of being able to program computers, and this idea that we might be able to get computers to think like we do, is a fascinating area. And from an apologetics perspective, I find it interesting because there's this idea out there that we're just a random assemblage of, or a specific assemblage of atoms, that our mind is just put all the electrons, protons, and everything in the right place with the right momenta, and you're going to get a mind. So this idea of what is it really to be intelligent or sentient, which we're going to get into in a second, I think has great apologetic implications, a fascinating discussion. And you put it in the context of AI, where we actually have the capacity to develop tools that are very beneficial for humanity. I just think it's a fascinating discussion. So
Absolutely.
So what's brought your interest? Because I know you did a class on big data, and so that's a very key component of the AI development right now.
Yeah.
What got you into that?
Yeah, my background is in undergrad comparative religion, but then I've done philosophy of religion, and lately, over the last number of years, ethics and applied ethics. But what happened recently was I was invited by the school to teach a graduate course in ethics, but it was ethics and data analysis, particularly big data analysis. And how do we get that big data? Well, AI is involved with that, algorithms and that sort of thing. And so I had a class, about 10, 12 or so, of data scientists. And my job was to connect with them, but take these different issues in big data, data analytics, and then examine from an ethical perspective and a Christian worldview perspective, how do we engage with that? What questions do we ask? Where descriptively, where are we going? And then where should we be going?
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about that kind of in the last half of what we're going to discuss. I think it's useful just to kind of put a little bit of context in what we're discussing, because I know for a long time when I heard AI, my thought was always in the realm of data from Star Trek, or C-3PO R2-D2 from Star Wars, or Vision from Marvel Universe, if you will. And I am sure you could think of all sorts of different creatures where somehow humans have assembled something together, built it into a life form that's now maybe a little bit different, but largely aware and operates just like we do. And in the lingo that we're going to use, or kind of the lingo that's out there, that's what we'll call an artificial general intelligence. It's basically artificial because it's produced by building something rather than having it be a living organism that's reproducing. But it's also intelligent in that it's very aware, can make high-level decisions. But there's kind of three levels of artificial intelligence that people talk about. So there's this artificial general intelligence, which is, kind of humans in a different fashion, if you will. There's a lot of what gets a lot of press these days are the artificial intelligence that we're actually doing, like Alexa and Siri, where they do something very specific. They're narrow intelligences. So I think these computer programs that can outplay humans in chess or Go or poker, that they're very good at what they can do, but that's really all they can do. So there's this artificial narrow intelligence, which often has superhuman capabilities, but in a very narrow area. There's the artificial general intelligence, which has human-like capabilities across many, many areas. And then there's also this idea that if we continue to develop our computers, the speeds with which they can do things, the amount of memory that they can store, the nodes of computational nodes in there, they will far exceed what human beings can. And so you're going to get artificial superintelligences. And what I find interesting about that discussion is that it seems like you can have kind of a whole range of narrow intelligences. The general intelligences are kind of like beings like we are, but the artificial superintelligences, it seems like they're either going to destroy humanity or be the savior of humanity. There is kind of no middle ground. Well, they're just going to be out there existing with us because they're presumably going to have our ability to think and be aware, but also have incredibly advanced abilities that allow them to refashion things to either save us or destroy us. So I'm just kind of curious, get your perspective on what do you see in these three different areas that you find intriguing?
Now you break it out into three different areas. I have generally a little bit more simplified, calling it weak or weaker artificial intelligence and strong. And that weaker part covers your narrow,
right?
And then the strong would cover those last two categories, right? And so questions that start to arise, I know that you're going to get to, is, if a computer beats me at chess, okay, that started to feel like a big deal, right? You remember that event,
right?
But does it worry you that much? It doesn't worry me that much that I can lose to something else in chess. Some of the other things you're describing in superintelligence, that starts to spark the imagination and where things can go. And I think that starts to create some dissonance in some respect, but maybe some harmony, like you said, we could say in our humanness.
Right.
So would you disagree with the weaker, stronger, or is it just more refined?
No, and that's those kind of terms, at least as I've been reading on it, the artificial narrow intelligence is kind of the weak artificial intelligence, and then the strong is the more general intelligence. And really, the artificial super intelligence is just an extrapolation of the general intelligence that assumes that the computer capabilities, they increase exponentially, which we've had a lot of talk about exponential stuff with all the COVID-19 and how outbreaks happen. But so right now the amount of computer power compared to the human brain is relatively small. I think our best supercomputers are kind of similar scale. But they're enormous, require huge amounts of power, whereas the brain operates on a pretty remarkably small amount of power. But it's going to start to ramp up, and once it starts to match, it's not like it's just going to plateau there. The idea being that it'll go up and then it'll just continue to exponentially increase, and so things that we couldn't even begin to dream of, this artificial superintelligence will be able to do. So yeah, you're right. That strong and weak, the narrow and general, they're kind of synonymous terms as the best I can say. So
you use in your latest blog here at RTB, you talk about the ladder of causation,
right?
And I know you get to do that more, but that sort of gives us a picture of climbing those advancing steps, and one wonders, well, how easy or how hard it is, climbing that ladder of causation. I know that's something we're going to talk about.
No, that's actually a really good transition, because when we look at the current status of AI, when I first started looking at this about a year ago, it's like, oh, there's all these AIs out there. Wait a second, there's nothing remotely resembling Data or C3PO out there. And so I'm realizing that there's this different terminology, and these kind of what all of the AIs that are out there do, are they basically take a bunch of data or some sort of data, process it through some filter, and correlate it with some output. So it's kind of the equivalent of, I've got a bunch of data out there. If this happens, what ought to come out the other end? And so you're teaching a computer how to recognize all of those patterns. So it might play out in image recognition, where the AI will take the image, break it down into pixels, find the lines, find the boundaries, eventually build it up and say, oh, okay, wait a second, this, after 2 or 3 layers, or maybe 8 layers of processing in this deep learning, it'll come and say, oh, this is a cat. And so now whenever it sees a image, it can be able to process and say, even though, whatever angle, oh, that's a cat. So it's correlating the input with the output, which is something very intuitive or basic to human. I mean, we do that all the time. We're out there, when I see the weather, or I see what goes on in the morning, what's going to happen in the afternoon type stuff. Sure. But it's kind of this correlation between what you see and this given output. And so that's kind of this first rung of the ladder of causation. And I'll just say straight off, this ladder of causation isn't anything unique to me. In fact, it's not unique to me. There's a fellow by the name of Judea Pearl, computer scientist at UCLA, who has developed this. And I just thought it was a very descriptive way of articulating the difference between what we can do in AI now and what a general intelligence would actually look like. And so we can do the seeing, kind of making correlations between things. But to get to the next step, we now have to start intervening. And so the question Pearl always, or says that characterizes that is, you can say, given that people have bought toothpaste, what is the probability, or what's the likelihood that they bought mouthwash as well? And so there's data to evaluate that. You can make that just by the correlations in there. The intervention would be, what happens if I double the price of toothpaste? What would happen? And we can do that as humans. We've got tools to develop that. But our AIs, if they don't have data to train on, they can't figure out what would happen if I did this.
So in some sense, would you say that they are only as good as, and they only function as well as much as we put into them? It's difficult to go beyond that.
Yeah, and it's even a little different than what we put into them, because we can feed them copious amounts of data, but you can throw in all the data you want, but all they're still doing is asking the question, how does this correlate with this? That next rung in the ladder of causation is asking, this hasn't happened yet. What would happen if I did this? And that's a very different animal, because there's no way to train that data set, because there isn't data I can feed it that says, okay, if you increase the price, this is what happened. And that's a little bit iffy, because there's often places where the price is twice as much somewhere. But if I've got this environment out in Kansas and I'm running a shop and I've got people buying this, and I say, what happens if I double this? I ought to have a pretty good idea what's going to happen before I do it, because if I'm not careful, I'm going to have my store go out of business. So this is something, again, humans do all the time, but figuring out how to get a computer to do that is really tricky.
And that's the part where, at least recently, the issue of big data comes in, is that we're getting so much data that the normal or traditional ways of dealing with that data aren't fast enough. They can't work with it. So we've had to develop new ways of mining the data, of understanding the data, not only collecting it, but also figuring out what it all means in that. When Target collects data, and it's going to point to someone. It's kind of interesting that Target has that Target as a logo. And if they're going to target someone for a particular item, they're taking large data sets to make those predictions, right?
Right. So it's just a very interesting. This is one of the things that I find in dealing with computers, is that there are things that intuitively I just know how to do. Teaching a computer how to do it is very difficult. I'll give you an example of when I was in graduate school, we just started. Believe it or not, we used to write out our logs. I mean, we took all our computer data, but we wrote out the logs of what the runs were. And so we had just transitioned in the time, in the few 3 or 4 years I was there, to where we would type them all into a computer. So now they're computer there. And we had, the way we would take data was we'd take half hour off of a source, half hour on of a source, and you'd compare those. So you track the same region of the sky so that you could get a background subtraction. And at the end of the night, you'd have to go through and say, all right, this run, of course, these two would go together, one's the on, one's the off. And then there was this tracking data where we just looked at the same region of the sky. So there were kind of 4 or 5 different types of runs that you would put in there. And it was very interesting, because I wanted to write a program that, as this file came in, I had all the data files, but then I had this log file that I wanted to put all of those runs together so that I could basically automate a data analysis script. And to do that, I needed to know which run went with which. And there was there were a few things in there. And it took me the better part of 2 days to do this thing that I can sit and look at this and in a half second have it all done. I mean, it was just intuitive how to do it. And it was like, okay, what are the actual steps I'm doing to do this? And so I went back and did all this, and there's all these what ifs and what ifs. And after about 2 days, I really kind of boiled it down to, okay, this is what I'm doing. And once I got that, then I could start to program it in. But it required a great understanding of what's going on. And that's kind of what the challenge of building a computer or building an artificial intelligence is I can write the program to do writing a program to do something is really not that challenging. But thinking about what I want the program to what I want the program to do is very challenging. And so that's kind of what's going on with this ladder of causation. You're taking from, can I correlate this input with that output, vice versa, and do that reliably, to now the computer would say, wait a second, I want to know what happens if I change this. And how would the computer modify itself to be able to do that? Either go out, experiment, get the data it needs, or what? So that's kind of that next step. And then the third step is to where you have this understanding to where now you can take this. I've got such a good understanding, I could actually imagine things that don't even exist. I mean, we routinely, like other universes, think of a computer that could write a movie about like the Marvel comics, the MCU, Marvel comic universe. We're imagining things that don't even exist, but yet they're put together in a coherent fashion because we understand how the laws of physics work, how people can be beyond reality, but it needs to be believable enough that they can engage with. I mean, we do that instinctively, but how do you get a computer to do that? So it's really this very large gap, and that's kind of what I want people to walk away from is these narrow intelligences that we built are impressive, and they will do lots of things, drive cars around. I mean, that's not a simple feat. But to get from there to where I'm sitting in the studio having a discussion about a deep thing that requires novel thought, that's a long ways away.
A long way.
Long way.
You would say.
Yes.
Yeah, with that. So there's lots of advancement going on in the weak or the narrow area, but those other two steps, you're saying there's a lot that has to go on there.
Yeah, and it's not even clear to me how you would program the computer to do that, what you would do, because at some level you have to get the computer to start asking questions about itself or questions about things rather than seeing the correlations, asking, well, what would happen if I did? And now that I understand all this, I've got such an understanding, I could even build this other scenario over here that's entirely unrelated, purely imaginary. I mean, what are the steps to do that? Because it's not clear to me that that's all just built on logical thought progression.
So then, yeah, go ahead.
I was just kind of, so when you think about that transition from I'm just making correlations to where you've got something that could actually think about and analyze and ponder and imagine things that aren't there, does that strike you as, how does that strike you? Is that something that, yeah, that's bizarre, but I could see we're there in a long way? It's like, I don't know, but I'm not going to bet against human creativity, or, wow, if we do, that's going to be problematic as a Christian. I mean, how do you think about that?
Yeah, I think with the narrow AI, or what I call the weak, it's fun as a layperson, someone who's not an expert in the area, to sort of sit back. I don't totally sit back because I'm using it all the time, so
Right.
you got to be careful about that. But just to see where it's going and to marvel at some of the advances in that, so that's I think can be fun and engaging. When we get over to
and I think that's very important that there are some ethical things that we're going to talk about.
Right.
These are pretty powerful tools that could do great good for humanity.
Yeah, well, and even like with the area that I was looking into with big data, what some medical facilities, special neonatal units are doing with the data that comes in is across hospitals, and that is they can anticipate certain maladies that can take place in like an early born infant, and they can take all of this data and predict what's going to happen before the malady takes place or before the event takes place. So some incredible things on helping humanity flourish can be on, not only are happening, but could be on the horizon. Now, there's a number of ethical questions that come with that, but we want to, there is a sense where we should focus on some of the good before we, worry too much about the other things. But now, when you talk about the more general or to the super, here's where I think some worldview considerations come into play, right? So if you are a naturalist, maybe a non-theist, what you see between us as matter and the computer or the advanced AI, there's a degree in difference, right? But from other worldviews, like the Christian worldview, there is not just degrees in difference, but there are differences in kind completely. And I know that's something more we'll talk about. But if you think it's just a matter of degree, well, then I have to figure out the steps to go that way, right? But if it's a matter of complete kind, then you either think, well, I think that's either metaphysically impossible or practically impossible. And so I may not be as excited to join the party regarding super and general. I'll watch and encourage, but I probably might be a little bit more skeptical that it can reach that point, because I don't think it's a matter of degrees. I think there's a difference in kind, right? So let's have some clarity before we have disagreement or agreement, but let's get clear on what we're talking about, I think.
No, that's a very good point. And, it kind of, as I've thought about this, from a Christian and a naturalist view, what we're trying to do are two very different things. Because, as you mentioned, the naturalist has, we're basically an arrangement of atoms. I mean, that's makes it sound pejorative, but that's ultimately what it boils down to, is we're an arrangement of atoms that thinks and does. And, that there's this incredible mind that comes out of that. Whereas in most Christian thought, and again, I think there's probably degrees of how that plays out in both places, that Christians, it seems like they've traditionally said that we're a union of mind and spirit, or body and spirit, that there's a physical component to who we are, but there's also a non-physical spiritual component to who we are. So is that kind of, when you're talking about the difference in kind, I assume that's at least part of what you're alluding to.
Yeah, and before even getting into the really the more difficult philosophical, metaphysical issues, or even the deeper scientific issues, we have some experience with this just in our everyday life. Like my interaction with my dog. I have a St. Bernard at home. Her name's Stella, and she's about 125 pounds. We love her. She's getting up there in years, but Stella's a great, wonderful dog. There's so many things I've been able to, or we have been able to teach her as a family. But it seems like it can only go so far. Trainers can only go so far. And every time I come home, she's glad to see me, but she doesn't go, where you been? Right.
Yeah.
We got to talk about this household arrangement thing, because I'm not cool with it.
Right.
That level of, if you want to call it sentience or ability to think. So does my dog think? Okay, I could say, yeah, my dog thinks, but it doesn't think about its thinking.
Right. Yeah.
So this is a second order ability or capacity. So there's a parallel. We might both have thoughts and beliefs about the world, but I don't have beliefs about, the dog doesn't have beliefs about its beliefs. It doesn't think about its thinking. It doesn't have desires to have desires, right? It has desires. I want the food, I want dinner. I want the treat, but it doesn't have desires to have desires. I really want to become a patrol dog. Stella hasn't said that.
No ambition.
No ambition. I don't know. Maybe it's our fault as dog parents. So we have these experiences in just everyday life with even the sentient creatures that we have around us. When we look at AI, my question becomes to the expert in the field, doesn't it seem like we're really wrestling here with differences in kind, or what philosophers will call ontological differences?
Right.
And so they may disagree, but I think they will have to make their case. At least one who tends to be a naturalist thinks it's only the latter is only a matter of degree. Make their case that yes, these things can emerge. What really can it emerge is that I have some skepticism.
Well, that's one of it strikes me that that's a really good avenue for research. And even when I was back writing my multiverse book, which has been, I think, probably 10 years ago now, one of the things that I argued in there is that a lot of these multiverse scenarios and the implications they had have this idea that if you get all the atoms in the right place, you've got a human around. So there's other Jeff Zweerings scattered throughout the multiverse. Some that are smarter, some that are dumber, some that have accomplished more, some that are axe murderers. Assuming that's, if it's possible, it happens somewhere type thing. But in order for the multiverse to explain everything, that the life must be purely physical. And it seems to me what you're articulating is, if there's this our thoughts about thoughts or our desires for desire, if that's something of a different kind, that it's a spiritual component, if you will, then as we pursue this intelligence, that will actually give us data to weigh in on that. Right now we can kind of argue from philosophical means, but we don't actually have the scientific data of what does it take to make something human or not, if you will. I mean, it's just so far beyond what we can test.
What does it take to be human? I mean, don't we have some idea biologically, physically?
No, we do, but but I guess if we could build something that largely replicated the physical capabilities of the human mind, as we try and do things, if we can make something that mimics humans more and more, that would be an impressive feat. But that to me is not human. That's just something that's doing what we've taught it to do. That's not thinking about, wait a second, who am I? And why are you asking me these questions? And are you sure you're real? Instead of, if we got something that was just mimicking us, that's impressive, but not, it still articulates that humans are exceptional in what they're doing. Whereas, if the naturalist is correct, then we ought to be able to not only get something close to the human mind, but also replicate human thought, behavior, the whole gambit. And when I was saying we don't have the data, it's like we can't actually build that structure to do the testing. It's still a long ways away. That's basically what I was saying. And I think that's an interesting scientific avenue to pursue, even though it's fraught with quite large ethical concerns as we're going about it.
Right. There is an idea here, a distinction that can be made. And I don't want to use too many big philosophical 50-cent words, but you're kind of bringing up an ontological versus an epistemological difference, meaning ontological meaning the nature of the reality of the thing. What kind of thing is it?
Okay.
And then epistemologically is how we know something. We may not be able to know, or it approximates human function, right? There's a famous scene in the second run of the Star Trek series with Data on demonstrating whether or not he's a person.
Right.
In the courtroom and that. So there's an epistemological issue there, but then we're also going after, you might wonder, well, is that thing really sentient, human, a human person,
right?
Like we are. The Christian worldview has some resources to not only imagine, but understand some of those things, right? And I know we're using human language to do it, so there's some limitations there, but we can make the distinction between human persons and, let's say, angelic persons.
Right.
So persons is a bigger category. God is tripersonal.
Right.
So we can understand that you can be a human person, but there are persons that are not human.
Right.
But every human is a person. Now the question will be is whether or not we can have those categories ontologically be a part of advanced AI or general or super AI. Right. I'm skeptical that can happen because I don't even think we have an ability to procreate from existing materials, but I'm sure we have the property to be able, or the capacity to be able to do that with the type of physical arrangements that you're talking about in that area.
No, and I often, if you notice all the books that I've written there, well, it's what if, what if the multiverse exists? What if we find life out there? What if the universe didn't have a beginning? Because to me, the big question is, okay, if those things are true, which science could come out, in principle, it could come out either way. I mean, we don't have the final answer on any of those. What if we build an artificial intelligence? I mean, there's a part, and I'm very much inclined to agree with you, that I think as a Christian, I need to think about what it means to be human.
Yes.
I need to think about who I am and who I am in light of who God is and what God has done. And I think there are aspects of AI that I think will make things that more and more mimic human behavior. In fact, we could probably do it to such the extent that we can't tell the difference between them. Okay. That wouldn't surprise me. But I do think, when you start getting into, can we make other sentient beings, things that actually, could we make a creature that has the capacity to worship God? I don't know. I think that's something that only God has the capacity to make things in his image. That would, so I think there are things about Christianity that would put limits on what we're or that would, if Christianity is true, there's going to be limits on what we're able to do.
maybe only making things according to its own kind, like we see in Genesis.
Yeah.
Like God, okay, here's a theological analogy. God is a necessary being, and God cannot, if you will, create another God like himself. Right?
Fair, right? Yeah, that would be self-contradictory.
Right, but that's not really something. Language is tricky. It's not really something that God can't do, so he lacks something. It's no. He's a maximally perfect being, right? So he can't do that. And we certainly are have a different, what I would call ontological distinction, or God is superior to us in that. And I think though we are sub-creators and we can do these amazing things with this technology, I actually don't think we have the innate capacity, like God wouldn't create another God, to create another race of humans per se. So I'm
inclined to agree.
I'm skeptical that that's the case. Now, I'm open but cautious. I've been wrong before on things, but it actually almost seems to be metaphysically impossible to do. But I don't want to have that be a trump card to stop the advancement, especially of narrow AI and what we can do, even though we should ask some very important ethical questions.
Yeah. Well, and I think that maybe that's a good place to transition. I think there are important theological things. What I love about these questions is not that I have answers. It's that it forces me to go and say, all right, what is the science doing? And so when we're building AI, what is it that's out there? What are they shooting for? What do we know, and what are we hoping to know? But then as a Christian, I need to also go in and ask the question, what does Christianity allow? I mean, if we're getting to where we're going to become gods and kind of in our own right, that's antithetical to what Christianity is teaching. If I tend to agree that the idea that we can create something like us, I don't think is true. I think we can create things that look a lot like us in a lot of ways. So it forces me to understand my theology better, simply because I don't have the data to answer everything out there, but I need to know what the landscape looks like so that I know where are fruitful areas to pursue. So if I know, if I've got this inclination from Christianity or where there's this boundary, I'm not really going to be hitting outside that, not because I don't think it's because practically speaking, I don't think that's the best place to put my resources. I'm more likely to be successful here. And I think, I think you can look at the history of science and show that you want to put your resources where you're most likely to make advances. That's where we made a lot of advances.
Yeah. There's a helpful distinction a friend of mine, a fellow philosopher, has made. We can look at this and we can talk about historical superiority or historical distinction, if you don't like that word, superiority. The first person to make it up to Everest has historical superiority or distinction. No one else will be the first. Right? But other people can do it, and maybe other robots and things can do it. That's historical superiority. Getting to Mars, rovers have historical superiority.
That's true.
But I'm not threatened by that historical superiority.
That's because we sent them
there. We have a different kind of superiority. Again, if you don't like that word superiority, just use the word distinction. So the rovers made it there first, but we did it, right? It's an extension of who we are, even though they have historical superiority. But I'm not threatened by that. The rover is not going, yay. You can program it to say yay when it gets there. But we're not threatened by that. Right? And then maybe we will get there. Okay, fine. But there seems to be that we also have, like, God has an ontological distinction and superiority from us. I think we have that ontological distinction as well. And that's the barrier that I want to ask my AI friends, my naturalist friends who are heading in that direction and are excited about it. Or some of them are actually pessimistic about the human race. And so they want to advance it so we can leave that behind and then advance to something else. So and you see this in various kinds of science fiction novels in that have come out, even very recently. So I think just philosophically and from a worldview perspective, we can talk about this difference between historical distinction and ontological distinction. We're not just different in degree from these things, we're different in kind. And we have to make that case, but also the persons who are making the strong AI claims will have to make their case too.
I want to leave some, we're kind of wrapping down or winding down here to have some questions, but I do think it's important to at least touch on some of the ethical concerns, because I think the pursuit of AI is a great pursuit. I mean, we're going to see a lot of neat, good things come out of that, things that benefit humanity. I guess the way I think about it, though, is that it's got this potential to be a really big hammer, big tool in this sense that a big hammer can do a lot to help you build things well, but it can also cause a lot of damage. And if you're going to have the wrecking ball that swings around, you're going to get a lot of training on that, whereas anybody can go to Home Depot and pick up a small hammer to do stuff. So if we got this potentially large hammer out there that we need to be careful how we use, there are some ethical things. I mean, one of the things that comes up is they've built these narrow AIs that one generates images, the other one analyzes them to see if it's fake, and in the process of this generation attack, you can actually build videos of people saying things that they didn't say. I think that just kind of undermines a lot of how we operate as a society, because if you can't believe what you see anymore, what do you do with that? And so how do you look at some of these ethical concerns, and what do you think is a good way to approach that?
Yeah, philosophers can talk about different kinds of skepticism. I won't go into all the distinctions, but just take two. There's common sense skepticism, and then there's philosophical skepticism, or you could even say a scientific skepticism. Common sense skepticism is just a healthy doubt about preposterous claims. There's giraffes in the RTB parking lot. Is that possible? Yes, it's possible, but it's not probable, right?
Yeah.
More scientific or philosophical skepticism comes in that says, okay, we can challenge some very cherished philosophical or scientific claims, but how far can we actually go with these kinds of things? So when it comes to things like, I think what you're referring to is deep fakes, you can download an app and do a deep fake these days. Now, they're not that good, but this technology is going to be more available. So I think and
it may not be that good now, but what it is compared to a year ago is remarkable, and it's not going to be too long to where you can not tell the difference.
So any good thing can become disordered.
Right. Yeah.
So you have good technology that can be used in a disordered way or to dehumanize people. And so a number of people are using these deep fake technologies in order, I would say, to dehumanize other people. Because there's a large data set of, let's say, celebrities, people are able to take that, put it into the AI, and then create more and better images to slap them on other people. And I don't want to get too far afield with this, but this has happened where people's lives have been ruined, who've been slapped onto, let's say, pornography or something else. So I think we're going to need to train ourselves to be able to move between that common sense and philosophical skepticism and not be too quick to jump to conclusions. Right? We're going to have to mitigate ourselves when someone says us a text or sends us a site and says, look what's happening. We're going to have to be much more mitigated, calm, cool, and you have to train yourself to do that. That's going to be very important, I think, in the near future.
That seems to me, I mean, I think it's true for everybody that needs to do that, but especially as Christians, we're called to be passionate about the truth. And so we need to learn how to do this. It's not a matter of if this is going to happen, it's when does it get there? And it just occurred to me as you were having that discussion that the worldview you come into, or the worldview you come at this with, has great implications for how you're doing this. Because your comment there was, we've seen things that dehumanize people. Well, if humans are exceptional, made in God's image, valuable, each and every one, as Christianity would say, that has one thing. But if we're the next step in an evolutionary ladder, that has very different implications of what is that really a bad thing or not, or maybe it's just the people that can't handle it are the ones that get filtered out. So it's a way of testing worldview.
And I think it's good to in dialogue with people who don't agree with us to try to get some clarity first. Don't try to persuade them to agree with us first, and saying, but get some clarity on this and saying, don't you agree that human persons are valuable? Yes, I do. Okay. So if we agree on that, regardless of how we justify it,
Yeah,
right? And we can talk about that. But if we can agree on that, there's some similar places that we can go, right? Should we not use these technologies? Doesn't that dehumanize this person?
Right.
And generally, I think we can get people to agree. Now, we're finding ways in culture where it's very fragile, right?
Yes.
So we have to work on it, and we should be on the forefront of doing that and being able to articulate why that is the case.
Well, let's kind of head off to the audience there. I know there's a number of questions. Kirby Hansen asked us, can you comment if or when the singularity, i.e. when computers and human minds become equal or merge, will occur? I know people talk about that, and it always seems like it's 50 years off. 50 years ago, it's still 50 years off. I have trouble commenting on that. I don't want to say, oh, this is when it's going to happen, because I'm not sure that it will happen. This to me is that will we get to the place where we replicate humanity? I'm not entirely sure we're going to do that. I think you could ask the question, when will computers have similar sort of calculational abilities or computational abilities as the human mind? Those are things that are a little bit more concrete that you can put anchors to. The idea of making something where human minds could merge with, that's a different distinction.
You mean merge with certain technology and where they become unified?
Yeah, or where they're kind of equivalent things, if you will. And given that I agree with you on the ontologically, I think what we build with computers will always be fundamentally different than humans. I don't know that we'll ever get the singularity in that sense.
Yeah, I'm skeptical philosophically on it. I'm skeptical theologically, and I'm skeptical scientifically.
Right. Yeah, I would agree.
So I would say those three different areas, and depending on who I'm talking to, I would use different evidences to talk about that.
Right.
But scientifically, it just seems really difficult to get there from the AI people that I talk to. Yet that they're still going to try.
Right. Yeah.
Right. And we have to talk about ethical boundaries of that. Because some people come from a world that you say, well, can we do it? Can we do it? Look, we can. Can we? And then I want to ask as an ethicist, I'm like, sure we can, but should we do it? Yeah. And this is an important distinction, I think, between what's called descriptive ethics and prescriptive ethics. Descriptive ethics describes what we have done, what we are doing, what we will do. Notice it describes it, but it does not say what we should do.
Right, yeah.
Prescriptive ethics is meant to prescribe, to tell us what we should do, and demonstrate the reasons why that is the case. So people are, I would say, and some already have tried to attempt these types of things. You're more versed than I am in this area, but certain types of implants. We've written a book, Fuzz and Ken, on Humans 2.0.
Right.
And so this is going to happen. But my sad prediction is that this is going to harm people and dehumanize them, not bring them great into not elevate them, is what
I mean, we've already seen evidence of that sort of thing with cloning humans. That I think the bulk of humanity would probably agree we shouldn't, but there are some who've decided, well, we can, so let's do. So I think that's a good point. So we got another question here from Bob Clapper. It says, will advances in AI undermine human exceptionalism? So the short answer is, if humans are genuinely exceptional, no. If we're exceptional, as we advance as we advance AI research, it will delineate that distinction even more. And I do think humans are exceptional. We've talked about a lot already here on the program. I just think as we pursue AI research, we'll be able to do certain things that humans do, but it will always say, yeah, but that's not human. We can build a computer, it can beat us in chess, but it's just not the way we do it. We can build something that beats us at Go, that recognize images, but it's just not quite the same way we do it. It always points to there's an exceptional way that humans do that. And I think it boils down to, we are made in God's image. And unless we have the capacity to make something in God's image, human will always be exceptional. And as we make advances, it will reveal that.
I think one thing, just as a qualification, we, especially as Christians, should be modest in our claims, though, in this respect. There's he is an atheist, he's a naturalist, he's a professor, Robert Sapolsky, in Stanford or Berkeley, I forget which. But he talks about more of the degree differences, right? And he uses the words, we're uniqueier, right?
I like that. Okay.
But what he demonstrates is that other animals can have a theory of mind. And we're finding things that are quite amazing about what the animals can do. And even Hugh has written a book on what the animals can teach us about it, right? So we want to be modest in our claims, not be too quick to just, disparage some of what I think people are thinking.
Right.
But I think you're right. At the end of the day, we're not just uniqueier, it's just on a completely different level.
Yeah.
And even Sapolsky in his talks mentions this. He says, we just find no parallel in the animal kingdom of things we can do. You can, and we have instances of this, like back in the 50s, 60s, I think the monkey's name was Congo, where they taught him how to paint. They taught elephants how to paint, right? Or do things. So we can raise the level of what animals can do. But the abilities of human beings, the chasm between that is unbelievable. I remember a painting of, it was an abstract painting of horse, I think it was horses dying in the First World War and all these flames, but it was abstract. And what it was meant to do is make you empathize through an abstract painting to think about these horses and feel bad for them 100 years ago.
Right.
We just find no parallel to something like this in animals, or even what we can sort of cultivate them to do.
Well, if I get what you're saying, and I've heard Fuzz, my impression is this is what Fuzz is doing as well, is that there's, Bible makes it pretty clear that humans are exceptional. But when you ask what are the measures of that exceptionalism, it's not always obvious. It used to be burying dead, well, other people, using tools. I mean, there's hints at that various places, but there's something, when you look at it, it's like there's something unique about humans that's distinct. And so I think AI will mimic more and more human behavior, but I don't think it will impinge on that truly unique human aspect.
And I'm suggesting that we can keep moving in that direction, but let's be really careful about how it elevates humans, how it helps them flourish, but be very, very mindful and aware of how it dehumanizes them or disorders them. So.
Got a question from Belinda, asks, are there current examples of artificial general intelligence and artificial superintelligence, or is the other terminology strong AI? The AIs that exist today are all narrow AIs, ANIs, artificial narrow intelligence. And that's kind of synonymous with weak. And there are some subtle differences between the two, but they kind of line up. Artificial narrow intelligence is weak AI. Artificial general intelligence is a strong AI, and a subcategory of that strong AI is the artificial superintelligence. So I would say people in this area are working towards the strong AI or the artificial general intelligence. But as of right now, there's no example of that. And I'm suspicious that I'm skeptical that we will ever get there as well. So, question from Keith Wilson says, if the limitations are only thought of in terms of differences of degree, where does the limitation of self-replication feature? So I think that if I get the question in there, is that this is all just differences in degree. So the computers or the programs that we build now are different in us only because we haven't made them as complex as we are. That at some point in time, these computers to be like us, they have to self-replicate. So I guess I would just ask the question in this way: is self-replication an essential human feature? Or is that something that if we made a data that doesn't reproduce, if you will, is that a distinction?
Right. Well, we have bred some animals that don't reproduce, right?
No, that's fair,
right?
Yeah.
So we have the capacity to reproduce after our kind. And for those animals I'm talking right now that are don't have the same distinction as us, we can cultivate them in different directions, but we see certain boundaries, how far we can go with dogs, from Chihuahua to Great Dane or whatever, right? So there just may be windows of what we can do in, like for us, we can procreate. When they say when someone says self-replicate, I'm assuming that's somewhat what they mean. If we build a machine and it replicates, well, I would say that wouldn't worry me as much because that's something that we put into it.
Right.
Right. So I think we would still have ontological distinction, even if we built a machine that could self-replicate. Does that make sense?
No, I think so. I guess the theological or the biblical connection is, okay, so Adam and Eve were created in God's image.
Right.
And the command they were given is be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and rule over its doing. That if I'm being a splitter, there's who we are, and then there's the task we're given. Is that command to be fruitful and multiply inherent in who we are, or is that something that is a task that we're given?
Or both?
Or both. I'm just kind of weighing in, theologically. I mean, how would you respond to that?
That we're called to do those things?
Is the command to do that, is that fulfilling our nature, or is that something that is just we're asked to do, that God tells us to do?
Well, it seems if you're asked or purposed to do something, then it's only weighty if you have the capacities to do that.
Right.
When you can realize the capacity to do it. When my son was first born, I didn't tell him to wash the car. Right.
You didn't?
3
weeks old. He was out there.
Right? We know they can grow into that.
Right.
But they don't. The capacity is resident within them.
Right.
But it can't be realized yet.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So my question about AI and other machines that we build, what capacities are we putting in them?
Right.
And people are asking, well, maybe other capacities can emerge that we haven't put in them. Mm-hmm. I'm skeptical about how far that can go. If I'm understanding
that's fair.
Question.
Yeah, right. It seems to me that replication or having offspring is part of how God has created humanity. The fact that we might create other things that could replicate, that doesn't strike me as a bizarre thing. It's interesting, but that's not particularly where I am. Question from Cheryl Carley asks, I think if AI is used to determine human behavior, moral values, my fear is that these morals won't come from Christianity, but they will be subjective. What do you think? This is I think we've kind of touched on this a lot, is how do we evaluate this? So if we're my sense of what she's going, or at least what it connects with me, is there's kind of this sense that, okay, we're going to build an AI, this general intelligence or super intelligence, and it's going to determine what's right and wrong and good and bad and make all the decisions. That it will be the logical, rational, won't make mistakes, determiner of the best thing, and we're just kind of listen and follow along. That seems to be what's put out there, or even the AIs that are built that way. That's kind of data. Nobody ever questions whether data is correct in what he says. It always strikes me as odd that here's this thing, this part of your crew that is faster, stronger, smarter, and yet they often don't ask him what they ought to do. It's like, if there's any person you want to know objectively what to do,
that's because they didn't have a philosopher on the show.
Maybe that's But I think this is where the worldview you come into this with is very important. That if we're going at it with a naturalist worldview, we're going to approach this very differently than if we come at it with a Christian worldview.
Yes and no. A secular person or someone who's a non-theist can agree that there is objective moral value. Mm-hmm. In fact, there's a number of atheists who think there are objective moral values. Right, so we don't want to build a straw man. And I'm not saying that she is. I'm just saying we want to be careful not to do that. So we might be able to come to agreement that there is objective moral value, but we might differ on how we justify it or ground it, right? Where does it come from?
So there's a practically what we're going to do, and why do we think that's the right thing to do are going to be different.
In a sense, right? Yeah. So we might be able to agree that there's an objective morality that we're both going to, we know what the good is, and then we're just trying to figure out how to apply it.
Right. Yeah.
Okay, this is the difference. People should know the difference between what's called normative ethics, where we all believe in an objective good. We try to figure out what's the best system way of reasoning to doing things.
Right.
Right. And I won't go too deep on this, but there's a difference between virtue ethics, deontological ethics, utilitarian ethics. Okay.
I gotta hand it to philosophers. You got a word for everything.
A word for everything. Ask my family if they like that. But you take normative systems, and then when you apply them, that's called applied ethics.
Right.
You take that system of reasoning and then apply it. And one of the issues that we have is, even though you agree that there's an objective good, and you're not a subjectivist or moral relativist, you might still be using different systems of reasoning in the applied situation. So a utilitarian reasons very differently than a deontologist.
Right.
Someone who, or a religious deontologist who holds to God's commands. Where a utilitarian looks at the result of the action and then says, well, is this benefiting the good and the most people? Right? So that's a different way of thinking about things. And there's some problems with that one could raise. One of the more practical concerns I have, or at least something I would raise, I was just reading earlier this year about a group of clinical psychologists who are using artificial intelligence as a way to treat their patients, right? So this is what they will do is, instead of seeing a human therapist, you'll see, for lack of better words, a machine. I'm sure they don't like to call it that, but that's programmed to sort of detect your mood, your disposition, and then using these huge data sets, they can dispense what psychologists think are fairly good advice, and if people take them. So they think that you can lower the cost of therapy, and more people can have access to it. What I would say is, I'm hesitant to think that on a broad scale, people are going to be comfortable with always going to an AI or a machine doing it, but it may be helpful on a small scale to deal with the amount of cases we might have or something.
Well, and it seems to me that how we think about going forward is important. And I agree. The idea that someone's an atheist means everything's subjective, there's a range and all of that in there. But I do think how we think about where we're going is really important. Because, for the Christian, I don't see how you allow the AI to determine right or wrong, good, bad. That's just, it would be usurping God's authority.
That's what I was talking about, a property that we have, a moral dimension that I don't see philosophers call exstantiated, or that is within material objects. Right. So that'd be a whole different dimension or domain.
Yeah, no, so I think that's it's a good question. No, it is. It's a good question, and one that I think we need to be pretty careful. It's one of those, as Christians, we definitely need to be in this area, involved in this discussion, because these are the sorts of things that people are wrestling with. So, question from Kathy Clapper says, nurses make ethical decisions based on something they cannot see, pain, that is. Can AI be programmed to do that? Well, I think that's kind of what you're alluding to there, that there's AIs can be built to discern, are you happy or sad? Are you in pain? Are you in a lot of pain or a little pain? That's hard because some people express pain very differently than others.
Sure.
I have a pretty high pain threshold. So by the time I express pain, it probably hurts pretty bad. Other people express it more quickly. So I think a lot of that is recognizing inputs and mapping to outputs. I mean, I don't even think it needs a general intelligence to do that. I think you can build a narrow AI that would be able to read people, if you will.
Yeah, and I'm saying psychology, we're already doing it to some great degree. And even when I go to my doctor, they'll ask me the question, if you're in pain, and then they try to quantify it, between 1 and 5, and then you learn that if I just say 2, then I don't get the treatment time. So, but 4,
In all honesty, it could actually probably be that the AI would do that more proficiently than a person would.
Yeah,
because there's somewhat of finding the objective measures that are not allow you to be bluffed, if you will. So,
and I'm not saying as an ethicist that we go full steam ahead.
Right. Yeah.
I tend to be open but cautious.
Yeah, I would agree there. Yeah.
Through these things, because this is being used, the AI is being used for court decisions or sentencing to help judges sentence better given greater data sets.
Right.
So that's another area that it's being.
Right. Last question for today. Daniel asks, could AI ever feel empathy and understand morals? I am skeptical, and I would say no. I think what an AI could do is mimic our ability to recognize it. And I think an AI could mimic the capacity of understanding morals. But the way the AI is going to approach or look at that is distinct from the way humans look at it. There's this shouldness or oughtness to a moral, whereas an AI is going to recognize it's going to be different. I'm not even sure how I would quantify that it would different, but I just don't see how it's going to have the moral behavior that we've programmed into it. It's not going to have an innate moral compass or an innate moral. Its being will not be built with a moral component like humans will, and so that would be. So no, I don't think an AI will ever feel empathy or understand morals. They may be able to describe and articulate and recognize, but there's a difference between actually feeling and understanding. Yeah,
and advice too.
Right.
Yeah, that's why I would go back to this distinction. Now, I haven't argued for it. I haven't justified it, but that when you talk about something like feeling is a sense, or pain is a sensation, and arguably, pain can result from a process in the body, right, through the neural system and that. But the pain itself, what philosophers call the qualia, is a property of the soul or the mind. And so I don't think that a machine can actually feel pain, have the sensation itself. And then also above that, you can feel pain. It's a whole nother thing to have empathy, what empathy even means. Right. And psychologists make a distinction between sympathy and empathy. And just training humans to understand, or kids, those differences is a long process that can be difficult. But I think it's ensouled creatures, and I could give arguments for that. We don't have time for it. But it's soulish creatures that have the capacities for that. I'm not sure that can emerge from.
And once again, we have another thing that ties back to what does it mean to actually be made in God's image? What does it mean to be human? Are we just physical, or is there something beyond the physical? And, historically, Christianity has said there's a union of physical and spiritual in humanity. So I think that leads to this distinction. And so, I know we're out of time here. We're going to wrap up, but I have this sense that as you've watched, there's been some intriguing and fascinating and hope for answers, and you realize that there may not be solid answers to this. Part of the reason why we had this discussion was to introduce you to a lot of the things that are pertinent in AI research. There's a lot of excitement about it, a lot of things that it can accomplish, but a lot of things to really think about and ponder as Christians. What does it mean if we develop an AI? What kinds of things are we going to mean? How does human exceptionalism play into that? What sort of worldviews need to come in? What are just the physical, technical things that we've got to work on? Will AI ever truly be human, if you will? They're great questions. There's a lot of things that Christianity has to say to that. I think there are things that Christianity has to say that are distinct from a naturalistic worldview, for example, or even worldviews of other religions. And so I think it's a great, fascinating area for discussion. Hopefully, more than anything, it's given you a brief introduction and piqued your interest to go out and study and pursue and be involved and aware of what's going on. Because I can guarantee you this, we've not had the final answer here. And what it looks like today, it will look very different in 5 years and 10 years down the road. And who knows what it will look like 50 years down the road. So let's go out, be involved, be fascinated, and especially as Christians, be incredibly fascinated and curious, because God has given us this capacity to know him, desire to understand and to spread his image throughout creation. And I think this is one of those areas where we have a unique ability, a unique opportunity to go out, because a lot of people are interested in what they are saying. Hope you had a good day. Go out, enjoy studying creation, and just really enjoyed your time here today. Glad you joined us here today. Have a good day.